Hey there everyone, welcome to the first RGE General Terrain Guide, which I hope will help you take your terrain from looking like these abominations.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on, man.
To pretty peak terrain builds such as these right here. So with that being said, we're gonna go over this in sections, which will be all timestamped. So the first section, we're generally just going to go over the bare basics and the bare minimum. And then the second section is where the star of the show is, where I'll show you the technique that me and a couple of other builders in the RGE community use when it comes to professional terrain making and or smooth terrain making, with the assistance of a speed build that I will be voicing over. And then we're just going to go yap about the two main principles when it comes to terrain making, and that is macro and micro terraining. And we'll go over what that means in just a bit. And then in the end, we're basically just going to take a look at different examples by me and including various other RGE builders in the community. That way you could hopefully get a more better grasp at the idea presented. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, obviously when you start a blank world, you want to make sure that you place a base plate. And what that is essentially just a plain old part. Now, when you place your base plate into the world, you want to make sure that the base plate is within this range. And what that basically is saying is that the base plate has to be above Y level -100. And just for anyone curious, that is essentially the water level. Previously, it used to be 5 -5, but it was changed. And anything below the water level, well, your game won't essentially work as intended. So you won't be able to spawn vehicles, you won't be able to spawn bots, everything is going to go kablooey. Right, so once you have that figured out, you want to make sure that your base plate is of maximum size, assuming that you are tackling a fairly medium to large scale map. And here are the maximum dimensions as shown. The maximum scaling size, both length, width, and height for all parts, including corners and wedges, is about 2048 feet by 2048 feet. And that goes in the X, Y, Z direction, as I said. Now, it doesn't matter what material, or as long as you know what your foundation is, then it's good enough. All right, let's move on to the next section now. Okay, now assuming that you've also determined other fundamental aspects when it comes to making and planning your map, your terrain, i.e. like scale, the type of terrain that you're going for, and your optimization goals, etc., etc. Once you've had that found out, which is important that you do first, we can start learning the technique. Now, the technique that we use to make these smooth looking terrain is called the Kill-X technique, named after my boy Kill-Expressor. But anyways, essentially all it involves is purely parts, and it involves a lot of rotating and just fine adjustments really. It's nothing too hard, it's simply repetitive, and that's the main thing that makes it quite tedious. It's really repetitive. So when you're doing this type of terrain, I recommend you just maybe have a podcast or some form of music playing in the background. But essentially over here I have 3 different variations of a terrain feature, which I simply call the mound or hill, or you can call it whatever you want, but essentially it's a foundation, so to speak, for this sort of technique. So just to go over quickly, color represents 2 main things. One is the elevation. So you'll see green is more lower, yellow is more of the medium, and then red is obviously higher elevation, a bit more steeper angle. And the second thing that it represents is whether it falls into the category of macro or micro terrain. And like I said in the beginning of the video, don't worry, we'll get into what that means. But for now, I'll just be showing you a speed build of one of the variations. I think it's the yellow one that I did, but yeah. And so there's 2 main ways you could build this. One is you could make 1/2 of the shell or the mound, and then you group that 1/2, and then you just rotate 180, and then try to align it from the other side. Or you could just build the skeletal structure, which is the middle part, the one that has the darker color, and then you just do the other adjacent lighter parts after that. So it's really up to you. It's very flexible, this terrain feature and this technique. Doesn't just apply to hills, but to mountains specifically as well. But yeah, you could use this for pretty much anything, and it looks pretty relatively smooth. Now you will notice that there are obviously some spots that are misaligned, and naturally that is a occurrence that is on Roblox's side, because especially with grouped assets, but I'll show you a way on how to exactly iron these sort of like gaps out, so don't worry about that. Anyways, for now, let's jump into the speed build. Okay, so to iron out these sort of abnormalities, it's pretty simple. All you gotta do is duplicate that part, rotate it a couple of few degrees, and then just sort of move it down to align with the original part. It's hard to put in words, but just as you're seeing in your screen right now, that's essentially how you do it. But now, generally speaking, I don't actually really do this much, simply for optimization, and especially when most of the time the terrain isn't really interacted by players. So it really just comes to preference and also the functionality of your terrain. So let's say you intend for this sort of mound or hill to be interactive with players and you want it to look very neat, obviously, you can do this smoothing out and stuff. But if it's simply just for the background, I don't really recommend doing all these like smoothing out and all that. So now that I hope you've learned how to make this mound, please keep in mind that this technique can be used in any shape. Like, it's really hard to put a word on it, like to put a measure. So I'm simply just going to show it without me voicing over anything. But if you're tackling more of like a mountain, this is how I would do it. Okay, now to the macro and micro terraining principle. So you can see here, similar to the previous mound diagram, I've basically just colored these three variations. So real quickly, green represents micro terraining, and yellow represents medium, or what I like to call midi terraining, and then obviously the red or orange represents macro terrain. And a quick analogy I'd like to associate this with is a resolution scale. So just like pixel art, or maybe like when you're taking a picture, so it's like a two-way feedback loop. So as you go higher with resolution, the more pixels you get, and then the less resolution, you get bigger pixels, and you get the point, right? So the same principle applies to this technique right here. And TLDR, basically micro terraining used for more higher resolution terrain, then macro terraining used for more lower resolution terrain, and then medium is in between. Now, when it comes to applying these to maps, general rule of thumb is that you mainly mix these two, and majority of your map is going to be at hopefully medium terrain. So essentially a medium resolution, as it's the best optimized and it won't cost you as many parts. Obviously that still depends on the builder. Generally speaking, it should be quite optimized. And we're going to explore some examples here in a bit. Alright, so first example here, I'm just going to take my insurgency ambush diorama. So as you can see here, I primarily used micro terraining, so a more higher resolution terrain. And since it is higher resolution, it means it takes much more parts because it's made out of more smaller segments. And so logically, you'd use micro terraining in a more smaller scale, and generally not recommended for large scale maps unless you want to add maybe a couple of features or Easter eggs, whatever it may be. But generally speaking, high resolution terrain you mainly use in much more smaller projects like this one. Alright, now medium terraining. I personally don't have much examples of my own because they're not really complete. So we're going to take a look at what the community has in store. So here we're taking a look at various pictures. Here it's Project Gonzi made by the amazing, well-skilled System 5 team, specifically Gamersman or Black Tomato, and Invector or Killer Expressor primarily, along with help with Tack and Sammy as well, and Edod. So you can see here the same, pretty much similar principle he's used, except these guys go more for the medium terrain. And that makes sense because System 5 mainly makes quite medium scale maps, and so using medium resolution terrain is definitely more appealing since it offers a balance in appearance but also optimization. So that's one thing you also want to keep in mind, and hopefully you take away from this video, is really try to balance optimization and appearance. I'm going to put up a general rule of thumb or a diagram here that essentially just illustrates a simple logic, which is obviously the more resolution, the more performance it costs, and then vice versa. Alright, here we also have the forest diorama by Killer Expressor and Vector, and Black Tomato, Gamersman. Similar principle. Here it's unlike what I did, which is more micro or high resolution terrain. They used a mix of both, so it's pretty peak. You can see here with the rocks, it's medium and micro as well. And then here we have another example. This is a project by Benchy. I don't know what exactly he's building. I'm pretty sure it's obviously like a GWatt oil refinery style map, Middle Eastern map. But as you can see, it's pretty cool, and using this pretty much the similar principle as we other RGE builders use when it comes to making these types of terrain. Alright, I hope this guide does provide at least some decent information. If you have any criticisms, you can always drop them down below. I do have a lot more examples, but unfortunately the video would just take too long, so if you guys want more tips and tricks from the community, I suggest you ask around in the BRM5 Discord server, or just wait until other RGE builders post their own videos in regards to anything RGE related. So yeah. Alright, thank you very much. Peace out.